Harold McAllister smiled a triumphant, cruel smile as his security guards shoved me out into the biting blizzard, clutching my single box of belongings. He thought he'd stolen my aquascrub system, my life's work, and left me with nothing but disgrace. But what that arrogant man didn't know was that the real secret, the one tiny, critical piece that made my invention truly priceless, wasn't on any server he'd hacked. It was right here, tucked safely inside the worn sole of my boot, a secret he'd never even imagine. My darkest hour was just the beginning of his biggest mistake. Before I continue, drop a comment telling me where you're listening to this from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You won't want to miss the ending. I remember those days in my lab so fondly. My aquascrub system, that little wonder, was nearly ready. I'd spend hours poring over the recycled bits, the old PVC pipes, the finely crushed charcoal from barbecue briquettes, and even the discarded coffee grounds, imagining the clean water it would bring to so many. It was my gift, built from things people usually just threw away, ready to make a difference in communities where clean water was a daily struggle. Harold McAllister, the CEO of McAllister Global Technologies, would often sweep through all smiles and backpats, telling me how brilliant I was, how my invention would change the world. I should have known better, shouldn't I? His charm always felt a little too slick, like a coat of fresh oil on a rusty hinge. He ran that huge company like his own personal kingdom, and he always thought the rules were for other people. Then came the day everything shattered into a million pieces. I walked into a meeting expecting to talk about the final funding for the next phase, maybe even the launch party for the aquascrub. But the room was cold, filled with a silence that cut through me. Harold stood there, not smiling, his usual easy grin replaced by a grim, severe expression. He was flanked by a team of stern-faced lawyers, their suits stiff and unyielding. My heart started to beat a little faster, a nervous flutter in my chest. He held up a stack of papers, thick and daunting, full of complicated words I could barely grasp. "Dorothy," he said, his voice dripping with a false, practiced regret. "We've uncovered some disturbing evidence." He started talking about doctored emails, falsified financial records, and accusations of industrial espionage. He made it sound like I was secretly trying to sell my beloved aquascrub research to a competitor for a huge sum of money I had never even seen. My heart sank, heavy as a stone in my chest. I looked around at the faces that had once smiled at me, my colleagues, now hardened with suspicion and judgment. He had painted me as a greedy traitor, a common thief, and in their eyes I could see they believed him. They didn't give me a chance to explain, to even utter a single word in my defense. My access badge, which had opened every door in that building for years, was ripped from my neck with a sharp tug. My lab, my sanctuary, the place where I had poured my heart and soul, was locked, my name erased from the door as if I had never existed. I watched, numb, as they boxed up my personal things. A few cherished photos, my favorite chipped coffee mug, a half-finished knitting project. Harold stood over me, his eyes gleaming with a terrible, undeniable triumph. "Such a shame, Dorothy," he purred, his voice barely a whisper. "After all your hard work, but McAllister Global Technologies will ensure your innovation reaches the people who need it." He meant he was stealing it, plain and simple, and throwing me away like yesterday's trash. The snow was falling in thick, angry flakes as the security guards marched me out of the building and to the street. The blizzard was raging, blurring the world into a cold, white mess. I clutched the single cardboard box, holding the pathetic remnants of my life, the only things they let me take. My professional reputation, my home, my life's purpose, all gone, vanished into the swirling, bitter wind. The biting cold seeped into my bones, But a different kind of fire began to burn deep inside me. Harold thought he had it all. He thought he'd left me with absolutely nothing. But as I trudged through the deepening snow, my worn boot sinking into the drifts, the invaluable secret tucked safely inside its sole was a whisper of defiance, a quiet promise that this wasn't the end. It was just the coldest, most painful beginning. The blizzard didn't care that I'd lost everything. It just kept swirling, a relentless reminder of how utterly alone I was. But even as the cold seeped into my bones, that tiny spark of defiance, the one tucked away like my secret in my boot, kept me warm. I found a little room, barely more than a closet, in a rundown boarding house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it had a roof, and more importantly, a small table by a window that looked out onto a forgotten alley. This little room became my new lab, my sanctuary, my quiet battlefield against Harold McAllister. My hands, though bruised from the fall, still remembered the dance of invention. I didn't have fancy equipment anymore, just my wits and a fierce resolve. Every day I'd venture out, not to mourn, but to hunt. The alleyways, construction sites, even generous trash bins became my treasure trove. People might have seen a lonely woman picking through discards, but I saw the raw potential, the bits and pieces of my dream waiting to be reborn. I started with the casing. Old PVC pipes, salvaged from a plumbing discard pile behind a hardware store, were carefully cut and fitted. The ends were sealed tight with food-grade silicone I'd meticulously peeled from discarded baking molds someone had thrown out. It was slow work, precise work, but every snip and every smooth layer of sealant felt like a small victory. I envisioned the sturdy, rugged thermos shape, cylindrical and reliable, just like I had designed it. Next, the filters. Oh, how I loved crafting those filters. I collected finely crushed charcoal from old fire pits at a nearby park, and even leftover barbecue briquettes from a restaurant's trash. That was the first layer, carefully packed into recycled plastic mesh, snipped patiently from old fruit bags and packaging. Then came the ingenious part, the special membrane. I spent hours soaking old newspapers and cardboard, breaking them down into cellulose pulp. To that, I blended discarded coffee grounds from a friendly diner owner who let me take them. The smell was surprisingly pleasant, earthy and promising. I dried and pressed this mixture, layer by painstaking layer, until it formed the perfect porous membrane. It was a secret recipe, known only to me, a critical piece that Harold would never find on any server. My little room, my street lab, was soon filled with the organized chaos of invention. Bits of plastic, piles of charcoal dust, and carefully folded paper were everywhere. My mind, usually buzzing with new ideas, was singularly focused. This wasn't just about making the aquascrub system work. It was about proving Harold wrong, about showing the world that goodness, ingenuity, and a humble spirit could triumph over greed. I carefully nested each filter layer inside the PVC casing, making sure everything was snug and secure. I added the cap on top for pouring in the dirty water, and a tiny spigot near the bottom for the clean water to emerge. It looked rough, yes, with its mottled texture from all the recycled bits, but in my hands it felt solid, reliable, and full of hope. Finally the day came for the first test. My heart hammered in my chest. I had found some murky, muddy water from a puddle outside, the kind you'd never dream of drinking. With shaking hands, I poured it into the top of the aquascrub system. I waited, holding my breath, watching the drops slowly collect at the spigot. And then a clear, beautiful stream began to flow, sparkling clean, utterly pure. I held a glass under it, watching it fill. It was perfect. A tear traced a path down my cheek, not of sadness, but of quiet, powerful triumph. Harold McAllister might have thrown me out into the snow, but he hadn't broken me. Not by a long shot. That first clear sip of water from my new aquascrub system, crafted right there in my tiny room, filled me with a warmth that the harshest blizzard couldn't touch. It was a secret victory just for me, but I knew my work wasn't done. The world needed clean water, and I needed to prove that my little wonder, built from humble discards, could do what Harold's grand, stolen version never would. So I continued my walks, collecting what others deemed trash, more old PVC, more discarded coffee grounds, even some plastic mesh from a construction site. My little room quickly filled again with the organized bits and pieces of my vision. One crisp afternoon, I was carefully sifting through a pile of what looked like perfectly good, unused cardboard boxes behind a busy grocery store. They were destined for the compactor, but to me they were potential cellulose for new filters. I hummed a little tune as I worked, completely absorbed in my task, my hands covered in a fine dust from the cardboard. Suddenly I heard a snicker, then another. "Look at her," a voice drawled, loud enough for me to hear. "The neighborhood junk collector." I glanced up. Two young women, their faces caked with heavy makeup and sneers, were pointing at me. They weren't even trying to hide their amusement. My heart gave a little twinge, a familiar ache, but I quickly pushed it away. I knew what I was doing, and their unkind words were just that. Words. "She's always out here digging through trash," another voice added, a man's this time. He pulled out his phone, holding it up, the camera lens glinting. "Getting some content for the internet, folks. The eccentric trash lady of Elm Street." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound, and his friends joined in. I felt a blush creep up my neck, but I just took a deep breath. I smiled faintly, not at them, but at the cardboard in my hands, remembering all the good it could do. I gently placed it in my bag, adjusted my scarf, and started to walk away, ignoring their ongoing taunts and the bright red recording light on the man's phone. Later that week, I heard about the video. It had made its rounds online, a little ripple in the vast ocean of the internet. Friends from my old church group who had stayed in touch called me, worried. "Dorothy, are you all right?" they'd ask. "Did you see what they posted?" They tried to be kind, but I could hear the pity in their voices. I just chuckled. "Oh, that old thing," I'd say. "It's nothing. Just some folks who don't understand." I didn't click on the link, didn't read the comments, didn't let their small-minded laughter touch the quiet resolve in my heart. Harold McAllister, I imagined, would have loved that video. He'd probably have watched it with that smug, satisfied smirk of his, thinking he'd truly broken me, reduced me to nothing more than a laughingstock. He thought he'd taken my invention, my reputation, my everything. But what he, and those mean-spirited strangers, didn't understand was that their mockery, their scorn, it was all just background noise. My spirit wasn't fragile, it was forged in the fire of injustice and the quiet strength of my purpose. I was back in my tiny room, my hands busy again, carefully soaking old newspapers, blending discarded coffee grounds. The aquascrub system, my humble secret, was almost ready for its true unveiling, and Harold McAllister was about to find out that a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous force of all. The quiet hum of creation in my little room was a balm to my soul. After the initial sting of that mean-spirited video, I just buckled down, making more aquascrub systems. Each one was a testament to my resilience, a quiet rebellion against Harold McAllister's greed. I knew they looked a little rough around the edges, made from salvaged bits and pieces, but they worked, and that was all that mattered. Meanwhile, back in his gleaming tower, Harold McAllister was fuming. The viral video meant to humiliate me had, of course, found its way to him. I could almost picture him, his face turning red, as he watched some internet joker poke fun at the eccentric trash lady. But it wasn't the mockery that truly enraged him. Oh no, it was seeing my invention, the aquascrub system, in my hands, working perfectly, right there on his computer screen. He'd stolen my research, my designs, my very idea, and here I was, not broken, not defeated, but still creating. His arrogance wouldn't allow it. In his mind, anything I created, especially something so close to his stolen corporate property, belonged to him. It was a slight, an insult to his absolute power, and Harold McAllister didn't tolerate insults. A few days later, as the early spring thaw was turning the muddy alleyways into squishy paths, I had just returned from one of my daily scavenger hunts, my bag clinking with some perfectly good, discarded aluminum cans I planned to repurpose. My landlady, sweet old Mrs. Miller, was out front, watering her potted petunias, when two sleek, black cars pulled up to the curb. They certainly didn't look like they belonged on our quiet, slightly worn street. Two men dressed in sharp, dark suits that seemed far too fancy for a Tuesday afternoon stepped out. They had that distinct corporate smell about them, all-expensive cologne and cold ambition. One of them, a tall, stern-faced man with narrow eyes, walked straight up to me. Mrs. Miller, bless her heart, straightened up, a wary look on her face. "Dorothy Bates?" the man asked, his voice clipped and formal. I nodded slowly, clutching my bag a little tighter. I'd seen his type before, Harold's type, all over the corporate world. "We're here on behalf of McAllister Global Technologies," he continued, not even bothering with a friendly greeting. "We understand you've been, reproducing company property?" He gestured vaguely towards my modest boarding house, as if expecting to see a factory of aquascrubs churning out. "Mr. McAllister is quite displeased. We're here to reclaim what is rightfully his." I almost laughed. Reclaim? He had never had it in the first place, not the true essence of it. I just looked at him, my expression calm, almost serene. He must have mistaken my composure for fear, because a faint, unpleasant smile touched his lips. "We can do this the easy way, Miss Bates," his companion added, a burly man with a permanent scowl stepping closer. "Just hand over what you've got, all of it." My heart gave a little flutter, but it wasn't fear this time. It was a flicker of excitement. I had been waiting for this moment, not knowing exactly when or how, but knowing it would come. Harold was predictable in his greed. I glanced towards my window where a carefully crafted aquascrub system sat on my table, ready and waiting. I gave them a small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that held a secret. "Oh, Harold, you thought you knew me so well, but you had no idea what I had in store for you." I looked at the men from McAllister Global Technologies, their faces as hard as granite. "Hand over what you've got, Miss Bates," the stern-faced man repeated, his voice devoid of warmth. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had my aquascrub systems, humble but true, and I had my secret. "Well," I said, a little smile playing on my lips, "I suppose if Mr. McAllister is so concerned about his property, he'd want to see it up close, wouldn't he?" I suggested a meeting, not in their intimidating offices, but in the small, sunlit community room at the local library. It felt like neutral ground, a place of learning, not of corporate bullying. They agreed, clearly thinking I was just delaying the inevitable. The next day, the community room felt far too big for the small gathering. Harold McAllister was there, of course, looking impeccably dressed, radiating an air of smug superiority. He sat across a long table from me, flanked by his same team of stiff lawyers, their pens poised, ready to pounce. He gave me a condescending nod, a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dorothy," he said, "a shame it's come to this, but we simply cannot allow you to infringe on company patents." I just smiled back, a genuine, warm smile. On the table in front of me sat one of my newly crafted aqua scrub systems, sturdy and rough-looking, a testament to repurposed bits and pieces. Harold's lawyers immediately dismissed it. A crude imitation, one of them sneered, clearly a poor attempt to copy the aqua scrub system developed by McAllister Global Technologies. "Oh, is it?" I asked, my voice soft but clear. I picked up my aqua scrub system. This little wonder, as you can see, is made from recycled PVC pipes, charcoal from old barbecue briquettes, and plastic mesh from fruit bags. I pointed to each part, calmly explaining how I had built it from scratch, right there in my tiny room. Then I gently opened a small compartment on the side of my aqua scrub, revealing the unique, layered filters within. "And this," I said, my voice gaining a quiet power, "this is the heart of it. My special membrane, crafted from cellulose from old newspapers and cardboard, blended with discarded coffee grounds." Harold shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing slightly. His lawyers exchanged nervous glances. They knew their company's version, the one they had put out, had a membrane that was similar, but not quite that-y. It was a tricky component to get just right. "It's a proprietary blend," I continued, "one that I developed over years of painstaking work." I then took off my worn boot, setting it carefully on the table. Everyone looked at me, bewildered. From a tiny, almost invisible pocket I had sewn into the sole, I pulled out a small, sealed packet. Inside, nestled on a soft piece of velvet, was a perfectly preserved tiny square of that unique membrane, along with a minuscule, dated and signed blueprint detailing its precise composition. The secret I had carefully tucked away the day Harold had thrown me out. And since you've made it this far, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps me keep bringing stories like this. The blueprint even had a tiny, faded coffee stain from an early morning in the lab. "This," I announced, holding up the tiny packet for everyone to see, "is a sample of the original membrane I created, along with its specific formula, time-stamped and documented from before I was ever fired from your company, Mr. McAllister." I looked him directly in the eye. "The aquascrub systems you're claiming as yours, the ones your company put on the market, don't have this exact membrane. They couldn't replicate it perfectly because the true secret was always with me." One of his lawyers, a younger woman who looked genuinely troubled, leaned over and whispered something to Harold. His face, usually so composed and confident, started to lose its color. His eyes, fixed on my humble aqua scrub system and that tiny packet, were suddenly filled with a dawning horror. He'd tried to steal my invention, then tried to claim my recreation of it. But in doing so, he had just admitted that his own version was incomplete, a hollow shell of my genius, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was the thief. The trap had been sprung, and Harold McAllister, for the first time in a very long time, looked utterly, completely lost. The quiet triumph of that day in the library, when Harold McAllister's face fell and his lawyers looked utterly stumped, didn't make headlines right away. But word has a funny way of traveling, especially when it involves an ingenious invention and a corporate giant making a colossal blunder. Before I knew it, whispers about my unique membrane, the one Harold's engineers couldn't quite replicate, began to ripple through the scientific community. It seemed the truth, much like clean water, always finds its way to the surface. Then a beautifully embossed letter arrived in my little room. It wasn't addressed to Dorothy Bates of McAllister Global Technologies, but simply to Ms. D. Bates, inventor. It was an invitation, a rather grand one, to the Global Solutions for Clean Water Summit, a major international conference held in a huge convention center downtown. They'd heard about my aquascrub system, the letter said, and its remarkable ability to purify water using recycled materials. They wanted me to present it. Anonymously at first, they mentioned, to let the invention speak for itself away from any corporate entanglements. I chuckled. Corporate entanglements was a very polite way of putting it. I didn't have a team to prepare a slick presentation or a fancy outfit to wear. My budget stretched to a new pair of sensible, polished shoes and a simple, yet elegant, navy blue dress that my landlady, dear Mrs. Miller, insisted on helping me pick out from a lovely little thrift shop. "You need to look the part, dear," she'd wink. I packed one of my aqua scrub systems, the best one I'd made, careful to cushion it in soft cloths. It still had that slightly mottled texture from all the different recycled bits, but it gleamed with a quiet pride. The day of the summit was overwhelming. The convention center was enormous, a gleaming fortress of glass and steel. People bustled everywhere, dressed in expensive suits and stylish dresses, their name tags glinting under the bright lights. I felt a little like a sparrow in a flock of peacocks, walking in with my simple dress and my humble, recycled aqua scrub. My heart fluttered, a mixture of nerves and a deep, quiet excitement. I could feel Harold McAllister's presence in the air, a phantom tension, even if I hadn't seen him yet. His company was, of course, a major sponsor, with banners and displays everywhere. I wondered if he knew I was here, if he knew who. Ms. D. Bates truly was. My designated presentation area was a modest stage in a side hall, but as I approached, I saw that it was already filling up. People were curious. They'd heard the buzz. My presentation slide, a simple image of my aqua scrub system with the words "Clean water from recycled wonders," flashed on a large screen behind the podium. I took a deep breath, walked to the podium, and gently placed my aqua scrub system on the small table beside it. I looked out at the faces in the audience, a mix of engineers, charity workers, curious onlookers, and even a few journalists with their cameras at the ready. My hands, which had built this little wonder from scraps, trembled just a tiny bit. I smiled, a genuine, warm smile, and looked directly into the camera that would broadcast my words to a much wider audience. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice clear and steady. "My name is Dorothy Bates, and I want to tell you about the power of humble beginnings." Harold McAllister's world, whether he knew it or not, was about to be turned completely upside down. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice clear and steady. "My name is Dorothy Bates, and I want to tell you about the power of humble beginnings." A ripple went through the audience, a few murmurs. Some might have recognized the name from the old news, the fabricated scandal, but many simply heard Dorothy Bates, inventor. I saw the journalists lean forward, their cameras clicking just a little bit faster. I picked up the aqua scrub system from the table, holding it up for all to see. It looked like a small, rugged thermos, cylindrical in shape, with a cap on top and a little spigot near the bottom. Its mottled texture from all the different recycled bits made it feel honest and real in my hands. "This," I explained, "is what I call the aqua scrub system. It's a compact, portable water purification device designed to turn even the murkiest, most unsafe water into clean, fresh drinking water. It can filter out tiny plastic bits, heavy metals, and nearly all the common bad bacteria and viruses, which makes it incredibly useful for places hit by natural disasters or just communities where clean water is a daily struggle." My heart felt warm as I looked at the little device, remembering all the quiet hours I'd poured into its creation. "What I love most about it," I continued, "is that I built it almost entirely from things people usually just threw away." I walked over to a small pitcher of water that had been placed on the stage, visibly murky with sediment and a cloudy green tinge. "Let me show you." With a steady hand, I poured the dirty water into the cap at the top of the aqua scrub system. "Inside," I explained, gesturing to the device, It uses a series of layered filters. I paused, letting the water begin its slow journey through my little wonder. The sturdy casing you see, it's fashioned from repurposed PVC pipes, the kind you'd find after old plumbing jobs, sealed tight with food-grade silicone I salvaged from discarded baking molds. As I spoke, I scanned the audience, my gaze moving over the sea of faces. And then I saw him. Sitting in the third row, stiff and unsmiling, was the stern-faced lawyer who had visited my boarding house, the one from McAllister Global Technologies. He had a notebook open, but his eyes were fixed on my aqua scrub. A tiny, knowing smile touched my lips. "One layer of the filter," I continued, "is made from finely crushed charcoal I'd gathered from old fire pits and even leftover barbecue briquettes. Another layer is recycled plastic mesh, snipped from old fruit bags and packaging." As I spoke, a small stream of beautifully purified water began to trickle from the spigot at the bottom, crystal clear and sparkling. The audience gasped softly, a wave of murmurs spreading through the room. I held a clear glass under the spigot, letting it fill with the clean water. The lawyer from McAllister Global Technologies watched, his face unreadable at first. But I saved the best part for last. "And then there's the special membrane," I said, my voice resonating with a quiet pride. "The truly ingenious part, I crafted it from a mixture of cellulose, which came from old newspapers, and cardboard, blended with discarded coffee grounds." I held up the glass of purified water, gleaming under the lights. All of these clever filters, nestled within this simple, rugged device, work together to bring us this. The lawyer in the third row, the representative from Harold McAllister's company, suddenly seemed to freeze. His eyes, which had been tracking my hands, widened. I watched as the color drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly pale. He knew the distinct, humble origins of my materials, the specific components that only I had pioneered, the ones Harold's engineers had struggled to perfectly replicate, even with my stolen designs. He knew that what I held in my hands was not just an invention, but the very proof of Harold's deceit. The silence in the room stretched, thick with unspoken understanding, as he stared, utterly stunned. That stunned silence in the convention hall, when the McAllister Global Technologies lawyer saw my aquascrub system and understood the true origins of my special membrane, didn't last long. It shattered into a whirlwind of activity. The news cameras, which had been gently clicking, suddenly whirred to life with a frantic energy. The journalists, sensing a much bigger story than just a humble inventor, swarmed around me, their microphones thrust forward. My quiet presentation had just become a very public unraveling of Harold McAllister's carefully constructed lies. The lawsuit that followed wasn't a long, drawn-out affair, tangled in endless legal jargon as Harold probably hoped. It was swift and surprisingly decisive. My little piece of paper from my boot, that tiny, dated blueprint, with its faded coffee stain from an early morning in my lab, suddenly held more weight than all of Harold's expensive corporate documents combined. It was the undeniable proof. It clearly showed the precise composition of my unique membrane, time-stamped from long before I was ever accused of industrial espionage. During the hearings, a very uncomfortable parade of Harold's own engineers had to testify. They squirmed in their seats, their faces red with embarrassment, as they admitted that their version of the aquascrub system, the one McAllister Global Technologies had rushed to market, never quite worked as well as it should have. They couldn't replicate my special membrane, not perfectly. They had tried, bless their hearts, for months, but the subtle blend of cellulose from old newspapers and cardboard, mixed with discarded coffee grounds, was my secret, a touch of pure genius that had truly eluded them. They had my designs, yes, but not my heart, not my intuition. Harold McAllister himself was forced to face the music. His usual charming smile was gone, replaced by a tense, desperate mask. The doctored emails and falsified financial records he had planted on my computer, the ones he used to frame me, were dissected and exposed for the elaborate fraud they were. The whole cunning plan, designed to paint me as a greedy traitor, dissolved under the harsh glare of truth. His legal team, once so formidable and arrogant, now looked utterly deflated, like balloons that had lost all their air. I sat in the courtroom, not with joy or anger, but with a quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, served with dignity. Watching Harold's empire crumble wasn't a celebration, but a solemn moment of truth. He had run his company like his personal kingdom, always believing his charm and cleverness could outwit anyone. But he had forgotten the simple power of honesty and the resilience of a spirit he thought he had broken. The end for McAllister Global Technologies came quickly. The financial ramifications of the lawsuit, the public outcry over Harold's fraud, and the massive hit to their reputation were simply too much. One quiet evening, as I was sitting by my window sipping a cup of tea, I saw it on the local news. The grand, imposing McAllister Global Technologies sign, which had loomed over the city for so long, was being taken down piece by painful piece. The golden letters, once so proud, lay scattered on the ground. Soon after, the news showed the massive glass doors of the headquarters, once revolving with ambition and power, being chained shut, a solitary lock glinting under the streetlights. Harold McAllister, the man who thought rules were for other people, had finally met his reckoning. His kingdom, built on stolen dreams, was no more. The dust of the courtroom had settled, and the grand, imposing McAllister Global Technologies sign was now just a memory. The legal teams, no longer fighting, were now meticulously untangling all the mess Harold had made. Slowly, carefully, my world began to mend itself. First came the official letters, stamped and sealed, clearing my name completely. It felt like a heavy cloak of shame had been lifted, allowing me to breathe freely again. Then, a lawyer with kind eyes, quite unlike Harold's team, called to tell me the most wonderful news. My family home, which had been unjustly tangled in Harold's legal mess, was being returned to me. Driving back to my old house, the familiar streets blurred through a haze of happy tears. It wasn't a grand mansion, just a cozy two-story house with a porch swing and a garden where I used to grow roses. As I unlocked the front door, the scent of old wood and faint potpourri greeted me. Everything was just as I had left it, though a little tidier, thanks to the legal team who had overseen its care. I walked through the rooms, touching the familiar armchair in the living room, running my hand over the antique desk in my study. Each touch brought a flood of memories, not of the pain, but of the peace and joy that had once filled these walls. That first night back in my own bed felt like falling into a cloud. The sheets were soft, the pillow molded perfectly to my head, and the silence, after months of the boarding house's creaks and distant street noises, was profound. I lay there, stretched out, feeling the incredible comfort of a real mattress under me, the warmth of my own blanket. The moonlight streamed through the window, painting silver stripes across the floor, just as it always had. I closed my eyes, a deep sigh escaping me, and for the first time in a very long time, I slept without a single worry, without a single ghost of Harold McAllister haunting my dreams. It was a sleep of true peace, of dignity restored. In the weeks that followed, the details of the settlement began to emerge. The compensation for my ruined reputation, the emotional distress, and the theft of my intellectual property was, frankly, an astonishing sum. More money than I had ever imagined seeing in my life. The lawyers presented it to me with solemn faces, outlining the figures, the investments, the future it could secure. My old church friends, when they heard, were overjoyed for me. "Dorothy, you deserve it," they'd say, envisioning me buying a grand new house, perhaps taking a long, luxurious cruise. Even Mrs. Miller, my dear landlady, had tears in her eyes, urging me to buy yourself something nice, dear, after all you've been through. But as I sat in my restored study, looking out at my blossoming rose garden, the large check felt almost heavy. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate it or that I didn't feel a deep gratitude for the justice it represented. It was just that my heart, the one that had poured itself into recycled pipes and coffee grounds, didn't quite resonate with accumulating wealth. I thought about the aquascrub system, about the communities I had wanted it to help, the clean water it could bring to so many. I remembered the children I'd seen in documentaries, their faces smudged, drinking from murky puddles. I thought about the blizzard, the cold, the feeling of having nothing but an idea and a dream. I called my kind lawyer. "I have a decision about the settlement money," I told him, my voice calm but firm. He braced himself, probably expecting requests for luxury cars or investments. "I want to establish a foundation," I said, "the humble secret foundation. I want to use every penny of this settlement after the necessary legal fees to build and distribute aquascrub systems free of charge to communities around the world that desperately need clean water. And," I added, a small, knowing smile on my face, "I want to dedicate a significant portion to funding research into sustainable technologies built from recycled materials, just like my little wonder. It's time for humble beginnings to truly change the world." Looking back, it all feels like a lifetime ago, yet as clear as the purest water from my aquascrub system. I remember the sharp, biting cold of that blizzard, the feeling of Harold McAllister's cruel triumph as his guards shoved me out. I clutched that single box of my belongings, thinking I had lost everything, my lab, my life's work, my very good name. But even then, deep down, a tiny spark of defiance flickered, tucked safely alongside that invaluable secret in the sole of my worn boot. That little room in Mrs. Miller's boarding house, barely more than a closet, became my sanctuary. It was there, amidst discarded PVC pipes and used coffee grounds, that I rebuilt my dream. Each snip of recycled plastic mesh, each careful blending of cellulose from old newspapers, was a quiet act of rebellion. People might have called me the eccentric trash lady, and Harold probably chuckled at the thought, believing he had broken me. But what he, and those who mocked me, didn't understand was that my spirit wasn't tied to a fancy lab or a corporate title. It was in my hands, in my heart, in my unwavering belief that good things could come from humble beginnings. The moment at the Global Solutions for Clean Water Summit, when I held up my aquascrub system, the one crafted from salvaged bits and pieces, and explained its true origins, felt like the culmination of everything. I saw Harold's lawyer's face fall, saw the dawning horror in his eyes as he realized the truth. It wasn't just about showing that my invention worked. It was about revealing the integrity that Harold McAllister had tried so desperately to steal. The lawsuit, the public exposure of his fraud, the way his empire crumbled, it wasn't about revenge for me. It was about balance, about proving that true value isn't found in greed or power, but in honest work and a kind heart. Having my home returned, sitting in my own study again, felt like a warm embrace after a long, cold journey. And the settlement money, a sum far beyond anything I had ever imagined, didn't tempt me with luxury. My heart, the one that had learned the true worth of a discarded pipe, knew exactly what to do. The humble secret foundation, dedicated to bringing clean water to those who need it most and to nurturing sustainable ideas, is what I truly built, something no one can ever take away. My journey taught me that true ingenuity isn't confined by four walls or dictated by a company name. It lives in the spark of an idea, in the resourcefulness of a quiet mind, and in the sheer will to make a difference, no matter the circumstances. Harold thought he could lock me out of my lab and strip me of my identity, but he couldn't touch the spirit that drove me. That spirit followed me from the grandest corporate towers to the humblest alleyways, and then out onto a global stage. Innovation doesn't have an address. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.